All right, let's talk about the media you see every single day. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the hidden forces and, the invisible filters that shape everything you watch, read, and listen to. I mean, you've probably felt this before, right? You watch one report and feel pretty good about something, but then you flip the channel and suddenly you're feeling anxious about the exact same topic. And you're left there thinking, wait, what's the real story here? Well, it's not some kind of magic trick. It's actually a set of filters that help build the reality that's presented to you. Think of it like an onion. And today, we're going to peel back each layer, one by one. Okay, so let's get into our first layer, which is the most personal one, bias. This is the human element. It's kind of like putting a colored tint on a camera lens. You're not changing the subject itself, but you are absolutely changing how we see the color and the tone of everything in the shot. So at its heart, bias is just a lean, a predisposition that makes a truly neutral view pretty much impossible. And here's what's so important to get. This can be completely intentional, designed to persuade you, or it can be entirely unintentional, just bubbling up from someone's own experiences without them even realizing it. The intentional kind of bias is usually the easiest to spot. So let's take a political ad for a mayor. It might show off safer streets, but hide the fact that homelessness is on the rise. It'll boast about shiny new city parks, but, forget to mention that public services had to be cut to pay for them. They're carefully picking and choosing what you see to build a very specific, very positive image. But unintentional bias, now that's a whole lot sneakier. A reporter might honestly believe they're being perfectly objective, but their own background could lead them to only interview sources they're already familiar with. And just like that, they end up reinforcing old stereotypes without ever meaning to. The bias is invisible to them, but its effect is very real. This whole idea of choice leads us right into our second layer, framing. This is less about personal beliefs and more about deliberate, directorial choices. So we're moving from the tint on the lens to where the camera itself is actually pointed, and what's being left just outside the shot. Framing is really the technique of building a specific viewpoint. And get this, even if every single fact in a story is technically true, the way they're all put together, what's emphasized, what's downplayed, can totally change the story's meaning and how you feel about it. The words used to frame something can create two completely different realities. Just look at this protest. On the left, the headline calls it a rally for action. That sounds positive, organized, right? But on the right, the same event is framed as chaos, where demonstrators disrupt. That sounds dangerous and negative. Same event, different frames, completely different feelings. Okay, so if bias colors a story and framing shapes it, our third layer zooms out even further. This is about agenda setting. And it's not about how a story is told, but about which stories get told in the first place. Yeah, this is a classic idea. It's pretty simple. The more the media covers a certain issue over and over again, the more important we, the public, think that issue is. They are literally setting the public's agenda for what we should all be talking about. A perfect example of this was all the intense focus on mail-in voting during the 2020 U.S. election. Now, the data showed that actual fraud was incredibly rare, but the huge amount of coverage made it a top concern for millions of people. It made the issue seem way more widespread than it actually was. And this brings us to our deepest and, honestly, most powerful layer. This is where we have to ask the really big question. Who owns the camera? Who's paying for the lights? Who ultimately decides which stories get put on the agenda and which ones never even see the light of day? And here's the reality of modern media. It's not really thousands of independent voices. It's a system where a handful of huge conglomerates control most of what we see and hear. This concentration often means you get fewer local reporters on the ground and a much more uniform national perspective on just about every issue. And this isn't just a theory. It happens in the real world. The Sinclair Broadcast Group, for instance, required its dozens of local news stations to run identical, centrally produced segments. This completely wiped out local independence and pushed a single perspective all across the country. And then, of course, there's the money. Advertising revenue is the lifeblood for most media. This creates this really powerful incentive cycle. Media outlets need to keep their advertisers happy, which means that stories that might be critical of those sponsors, well, sometimes those stories get watered down or maybe even just disappear entirely. So after peeling back all these layers, what's the takeaway? The crucial point here is to turn all this knowledge into a practical skill, a toolkit you can actually use every single day. It all comes down to a simple 3-question check. First, follow the money. Who owns this outlet? Who are its major advertisers? Second, analyze what they're doing. Are they using emotionally charged words? Are the images chosen to make you feel a certain way? And third, and this is the most important one, think like an editor. What is being included, and whose voices might be totally missing from this story? By asking these simple questions, you go from being a passive consumer to an active, critical analyst. You're not just watching the story anymore. You're seeing how the story was built. So the question to leave you with is, now that you have the tools to see the filters, what will you start to see?